The World Beyond the Headlines lecture series is a project of the University of Chicago Center for International Studies.
Good evening. My name is Philip Drake, and I'm the Center for International Studies lecturer in environmental studies. And I'm pleased to welcome you to the first Beyond the Headlines lecture for the autumn quarter. The Beyond the Headlines series is a long-standing project of the Center for International Studies that presents in-depth perspectives on current issues of global significance. The next World Beyond the Headlines event will be held on Tuesday, November 12th, and features Elizabeth Thompson, a historian from the University of Virginia, who will be speaking on a recent book, Justice Interrupted: The Struggle for Constitutional Government in the Middle East. Please visit the Center for International Studies website, cis.uchicago.edu, for more information about this event and a bunch of other events that we're holding. Tonight, we are pleased to hear from Steve Sapienza and Linda Qiu, two journalists from the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting on the local costs of global goods. Before introducing Steve and Linda in more detail, I would like to turn over the floor to Natalie Applewhite, the Managing Director of the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting. The Pulitzer Center, along with the UChicago Careers in Journalism and the Human Rights Program, have joined with the Center for International Studies to make tonight's event possible. Natalie.
Thank you.
Sorry, I can't forget.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm not sure how we get it up. Okay, so can you hear me? So I'm Natalie, and I've been with the Pulitzer Center since shortly after we started the organization in 2006. And we're just really thrilled to be here tonight, so thank you all for coming. The Pulitzer Center's mission is to raise awareness of underreported systemic global crises. And we do that by giving grants to journalists and helping them get out into the field and do the reporting in the first place. And then also by bringing the journalists out into schools and trying to engage the public. So both at a secondary school level as well as at universities like this, and also in public community events that we do. Sorry, knocking over a computer. So our mission overall is to just try to raise awareness of these stories that would otherwise not be reported on. As many of you know, the US news media increasingly focuses on global issues, and when we focus on the international, it tends to be with a very simplistic perspective. There are fewer and fewer actual resources for supporting the kind of journalism that really enlighten what's happening at a deeper level. So not just what's happening today, but what's going on, underneath the surface. What are the root causes of a lot of the environmental crises we see? What are the root causes of the conflicts that we see? What are the root causes of, when there's an earthquake in Haiti, we had about 20 proposals that very day. Those aren't the kinds of stories we're interested in reporting. This is the reporting that we've supported lasts for years after the fact and tries to really stay on once journalists have left. So our University of Chicago partnership has been a really wonderful introduction. This is our second year now. And we're just thrilled to be partnering with such a prestigious university. And as many of the journalists have said who have visited classes, the students here have really engaged and challenged them. And so we appreciate that. And thank you for your interest in the issues that we're reporting on. We're also very lucky to have, as part of this campus consortium partnership, where we have these relationships with universities, we have student fellowship programs. And Linda Qiu is our second student fellow, and she's going to talk about her reporting from Botswana this summer. And she's done a really terrific job, and it's a great example of the kind of journalism that we're trying to really nurture and get out into the world. So it's not just telling one story, but finding ways to continue to engage on these issues going forward. So for the students in the audience, if you're interested in learning more about the student fellowships and our partnership with the university, you can talk to Ben Waltzer, who's sitting back there, or myself, or Linda, of course, who can tell you more about what that experience was like. We'll have a little reception afterwards and we can chat more about that. And I also want to highlight that also, as a byproduct of our relationship, we had a wonderful intern this summer, Jason Huang, who you can also talk to if you're interested in learning more about internships with us. So thank you again for coming, and I hope you'll stick around for the reception and talk more to all of us about either what we do at the center or Linda and Steve's reporting. And I should say that Steve is one of our most veteran journalists, and we've done, I don't know, like dozens of projects with him at this point, at least a dozen? Yeah. And so you're very lucky to have someone with his experience and commitment to telling these kinds of stories. So thank you.
Yes, tonight we're thrilled to have Steve Sapienza and Linda Qiu here to present their papers, or to present their presentations. Steve Sapienza is a Pulitzer Center grantee and an award-winning news and documentary producer who has covered a wide range of human security stories, including the HIV crisis in Haiti and the Dominican Republic, child soldiers in Sierra Leone, climate refugees in Bangladesh, and landmine survivors in Cambodia. For over 15 years, he has shot and produced stories for broadcast television and internet distribution. Most recently, he earned a 2009 News and Documentary Emmy for his work on livehopelove.com, a groundbreaking multimedia project focusing on the human face of HIV/AIDS in Jamaica. In 2008, he received the Ruth Adams Award for reporting on dwindling water supplies in Asia. In 2002, he produced Deadlock, Russia's Forgotten War, for CNN Presents, winner of a CINE Golden Eagle. Previously, he was co-director of the Azimuth Media, and senior producer with the Global Affairs television series Foreign Exchange with Fareed Zakaria. He is currently producing a documentary called Easy Like Water about the impact of climate change on Bangladesh. Tonight, Steve will discuss his reporting on illegal gold mining in Peru. Linda Qiu is a 2013 Pulitzer Center Student Reporting Fellow and a rising fourth year at the University of Chicago, majoring in environmental studies and minoring in creative writing. She is a former news editor for the Chicago Maroon, the university's newspaper, and a former new media editor for the University of Chicago's website. Linda would like to pursue environmental journalism specifically related to natural resource access and consumption. She will be speaking on her Pulitzer reporting project, which investigates the environmental and human tolls of diamond mining in Botswana. So tonight we'll first hear from Linda, then Steve, and then following their presentations, we'll have a short question and answer period, and then a reception upstairs in the tea room on the next floor. So I invite all of you to that. But why don't we go ahead and turn the floor over to Linda. Thank you for coming in, and thank you too for visiting.
Good evening. Just some more background about me. I'm actually now a news editor at the Maroon. I went back and I'm missing production night tonight to speak to you guys, to pick up a copy after you leave. So I became acquainted with Botswana through the University of Chicago affiliated program in Botswana. So I spent a semester studying abroad there before embarking on my Pulitzer Center project. And through this university immersion program, I was able to learn a lot more about the culture and the customs and also the language, which was really, really helpful in my reporting. And so here I'm going to present on the water and diamond paradox of Botswana. So the title of this report obviously alludes to Adam Smith's famous paradox of value. I'm doing my social reading, I guess. So this paradox points out that there's an obvious contradiction between water and diamond. So water on one hand is plentiful and it's really, really necessary to life. And on the other hand, you have diamonds, which are also really plentiful and not quite as necessary to life. And yet diamonds their market value is much, much higher than Botswana. And this is a paradox that's really, really present in Botswana, not only on a theoretical scale, but on a very, very real life model as well. So a little bit about Botswana. It's a medium-sized country in southern Africa, formerly the British Protectorate of Bechuanaland. When it became independent in 1966, it was one of the poorest countries in the world, with a GPD per capita of about $70 annually. Right now, it's one of the fastest growing economies in the world and in Africa. It enjoys stable democratic governance, and it's really branded as a paragon of success. It's called the African success model, and sort of like the model to use for all other African nations that, conventionally aren't doing as well. But, and some interesting facts about Botswana. So its currency is called the pula, which is the local language for rain, which will be an important note to remember in the future. It's also the origin of watermelon is supposedly in Botswana, and its cattle herd is bigger than its population size. And so those three aspects sort of reflect some of the themes that I'm going to be talking about later tonight. Moreover, Botswana is also the largest producers of gem diamonds in the entire world. So diamonds account for roughly a third of national GDP right now. Botswana uses about 32.1 million metric tons of ore, which yields about 32 million carats of diamonds in a year. And these are top grade diamonds, and there might be a couple of Bots diamonds in the audience right now for all we know. A fourth of the world's gem diamonds come from Botswana, and it has a 50-50 partnership with, the Botswana's government has a 50-50 partnership with De Beers Corporation, and together they own 4 diamond mines in the entire nation, 3 of which rely on groundwater. Let's see. So in other words, the country is extremely reliant on these diamonds. It's really rich in these diamonds, but also because of this government initiative with De Beers, the diamonds also provide for a lot of government services like education and healthcare, and also farm subsidies, which are all really interconnected in Botswana. At the same time, Botswana's climate is extremely harsh and volatile. It's located in one of the driest regions of the world, sub-Saharan Africa. It's covered approximately 70% by the Kalahari, and even though the Kalahari isn't a true desert and we call it a semi-arid savanna, it's still a really volatile place to live. There's very, very little rain, and most of the vegetation that grows are really just dry vegetation, and there's a lot of herding that goes on and a lot of cattle ranching that goes on, which also just further impacts the degradation of the natural environment of Botswana. Tourism is also really big, so a lot of Botswana land is protected, but out of the places that aren't protected, there's a lot of grazing and subsistence farming that goes on in the country besides all the diamond mines. Most of the diamond mines in Botswana are actually located in the Kalahari as well. Moreover, as I said, Botswana is an extremely dry country. 78 inches of water evaporate annually. Annual average rainfall hovers around 16 inches. So that's like a factor of about 5, which means that evaporation is outpacing precipitation from 5 to 1, which we can see is a huge problem. Moreover, even though diamonds provide for a third of GDP, the majority of the country are subsistence farmers. They rely on agriculture, and that uses about a third of national water consumption, even though it maybe contributes to less than 5% of the entire economy. So in other words, diamonds are really, really consuming in water, and they're really important in Botswana. Farming also really is an important role in the culture and lives of these Botswana, and also, water is needed for farming and cattle ranching. So you can see that water is something that's really tolling to all sectors of life in Botswana. So here's the twist. Botswana's mines are using up more groundwater than replenished in the country. And like many countries, the entire nation is using it at unsustainable levels. We have a case where diamond mining and agriculture are coming to direct conflicts with the daily needs of people. Which brings us to Maboane, which is sort of the nexus of my reporting at the Pulitzer Center. It's a little village of around 2,000 people, mostly subsistence farmers and unskilled laborers, and there's a lot of little places like this around Botswana. This one in particular is about 60 kilometers north of Jwaneng Diamond Mine, which is the richest diamond mine in the entire world. Jwaneng operates 24/7 and needs about 22.3 million liters of water daily. That's the equivalent of 9 Olympic-sized swimming pools. So in order to operate at 24/7 and use all of this water, it has about 27 boreholes around the area where Maboane exists. So 27 boreholes pumping 9 Olympic-sized swimming pools full of water to these diamond mines. 1 borehole for the 2,000 people who live in Maboane, as well as 2 other villages. So a total of about 9,500 people, 1 borehole versus, 22.3 million liters for the diamonds every day. So I visited Maboane in early May of this year, and this is about fall in Botswana. So weekends are also the busiest time for these villages because all the children have returned from school, which is 20 kilometers away, and they live there for the majority of the week. But when they return, their primary goal is to collect water for their families. And so they get up really, really early, 8 or 9 every weekend, and gather all of these empty canisters and hitch their families' donkey carts to the single communal standpipe in the entire village, and line up and basically just wait for water. And here, water is really erratic. On a good day, one family can maybe fill up all their canisters, and the next family will wait like a couple of minutes, like half an hour or so, before the water flows again. On an average day, you can wait up to, I think, 3 or 4 hours in between turns. Water, like I said, is really erratic. Sometimes you never know how much water is going to flow out of these pipes. You never know the quality of the water that's going to flow out of these pipes. And as you can see in this picture, the surrounding area in these standpipes are not treated, are poorly managed, and cattle, children, parasites all sort of just go around this place. And no one really talks about it or takes care of it, and it's just sort of the way of life for this village. Let's see. So at this particular standpipe, I met a little boy, and he's here in the middle, and his name is Obonawatswe, which he really thought it was funny because I couldn't really pronounce his name, and so he and his friends called me, stupid white woman the entire time. But anyways, he's only 9 years old, and he told me that he doesn't remember a time where he didn't have to do this. Before, it was his older brothers who had to go to this pipe and do this for every day. And on weekdays, if his mom runs out of water, she does it herself. And they have a large family, and so when he goes, he's collecting water for all the needs of his entire family. This includes water for cooking, water for cleaning, water for drinking, and water for bathing, and water for washing his clothes. And if he doesn't wash his clothes, there's a penalty at school, and he gets beaten up. And so on days when water is really, really irregular and not flowing, he's not having a really great time either. And not only because he can't drink water, because he's actually gonna get beaten up by his teachers for this. And he told me, as if he sort of knew that I was looking for a good quote. He told me, "We children of Maboane are angry and we're hungry." But at the same time, he feels deep roots for this place. He said that he was born here, all of his family was born here and have lived here, and he doesn't want to move out despite the lack of water, which I thought was a really incredible thing to say. Then he told me also that there are bad days, bad weeks, bad months beyond the average and good days. And so this happens when in September or October, when there are usually storms, power outages will cause the borehole, which is pumped electrically, to not function at all. So during these days, the government will provide water bowsers, which are these gigantic tanks, 1,000 liters usually, and they'll bring 1 or 2 a week to supply this village. But on the off days, the village really fends for itself. Let's see. And so this happens every year, though. So a storm comes, it'll knock out electricity, you can't pump water to the boreholes, or there's just simply no water because it's really dry and it hasn't rained in a really long time because this groundwater is replenished by rainfall. So, and this since this happens every year, everyone sort of acknowledges that maybe the problem is within Zhuaneng, which is pumping all of this water out of the region to feed its diamond mine operations. And so Zhuaneng, as you can see here, is fenced off, and people really can't access it without direct government approval, but the villagers of Mabuane have been in contact with Zhuaneng and have, asked for help of some sort since they are in the area taking all this water. Zhuaneng supposedly was supposed to provide for a clinic and a school for Mabuane, and they never fulfilled their promise after drilling the boreholes. And Zhuaneng's 27 boreholes also come at no cost to them. So this is because in 1968, the Water Act of Botswana allowed mining companies free and unlimited extraction rights from within their perimeters. So when a mining company sets up their contract, they will have a general area which encompasses the boreholes, and from that area, they can extract all the water that they want for free. But of course, it's not free. The government subsidizes this water to the Independent Utilities Corporation. So every year, Botswana's government pays around 250 million pula, and that's the equivalent of about $2.9 million to the Independent Water Utilities Corporation, which is the agency that oversees all the water needs of Botswana. $2.9 million is a rather small sum for De Beers, which is, like a multinational corporation that is producing gem diamonds, and yet they're not paying for this water at all. Meanwhile, the villagers in Mabuane, who have raised a couple thousand dollars to build another standpipe and connect piping to their houses, just simply don't have the water to go into their houses because of this. Yet the chief of Mabuane and its residents really have a sacrificial attitude towards this entire problem. They think that because diamonds are really the source of prosperity in Botswana, if they're suffering, like they said, if they're suffering and it's for Botswana's good, then it's worth it. If we suffer and Botswana doesn't suffer, it's worth it, and that's sort of their attitude. And this is sort of an attitude that sort of characterizes all of Botswana. It's a very everyone in the country has a unified feeling towards diamonds. Diamonds have brought prosperity, so everyone thinks that all of the diamonds are doing good in the country, which they are. But it also raises these interesting questions about the conflicts between diamonds and cattle and agriculture and where people go from there. And you can go to pulitzercenter.org, and I have other parts of the project on rural needs in northern Botswana, the conflict between diamond corporations and also ethnic groups in Botswana. So you can read all about that on the website. And all of the pictures here were provided by Stephanie Cook, who's also a U of C student. Yeah, I think that's it. I'll give it to Steve then. Thank you.
Good job. So, let's see, this is the PowerPoint here. Bear with me one moment. I just want to call up the other presentation. So thank you, Linda. That was really fascinating, and really impressed with how in-depth that you got into that issue, and really congratulate you and Stephanie on bringing that story home. It's such an important story, obviously underreported story. I've never heard of anything like that. I've heard of blood diamonds, but not drought diamonds or diamonds that have a connection to water in a community's problems with water. So thank you for that. Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. I'd like to thank Andy Gran and everyone at the Center for International Studies for inviting me here and hosting me. It's been a good visit so far, and I appreciate that. Thank you for coming as a freelancer. I'm based in Washington. I travel a lot, and I produce these reports, but I don't have very many opportunities to screen videos in public and get immediate feedback from people. So thank you for coming, and I hope we can have a good discussion afterwards. The stories I'm going to show you tonight are all part of the Pulitzer Center's Global Goods and Local Costs reporting initiative. And what they were trying to do was draw attention to, just as the title suggests, products that we use in everyday life that we may take for granted, where these products come from, and what are the local costs to the people who produce these products and the places where they are produced. And how many stories do you guys have now? I mean, this has just been going on for a couple years now. 13 or 14 projects that are really a lot of worthwhile projects to check out and see a lot of underreported stories that you may not have come across before. For me, the story that I first did that was part of this project was in Peru. In Peru, where mining is a very big business. Peru is one of the 4th largest exporters of gold worldwide. And the country is home to many, many large-scale mining operations, and many multinational corporations go to Peru and cut deals with the government and do a lot of mining. And that's a story that really does get a lot of coverage in national media here in the U.S. and international media. So I wanted to focus on something that was a little different and underreported. And so I became interested in illegal gold mining in Peru. And at the time, this was in 2011, the government was having a lot of problems in a region called Madre de Dios, which is in southeastern Peru. And most of the illegal mining gold mining that's happening in Peru is happening in Madre de Dios. And according to a new report by Verite, which is a Massachusetts-based fair labor organization, the mining sector is propped up with forced labor and child labor, and it's really continuing there since even before my visit. It had expanded primarily due to the spike in gold prices, international gold prices, around the time of the economic downturn. And we had gold prices nearly double from 2008 levels all the way up to around $1,700 an ounce. And this was driving small-scale and illegal gold miners to go to Madre de Dios and dig for gold. Now, the region is just a short flight from Machu Picchu, which is a known tourist destination. And I took that flight into Puerto Maldonado, which is the capital of Madre de Dios. And on the flight, I was flanked by tourists, and they're all going to the Amazon to look at giant river otters and to see tapirs and colorful macaws. And, the region was trying to become a real hub, and is a hub for ecotourism. But at the same time, it's really become a haven for these illegal miners. It's really become an epicenter for illegal gold extraction. Now, its history in Madre de Dios, the history of the area, has always been one of extraction. First it was timber, then it was oil, and then it was rubber. But really, it's the current global demand for gold that's driving what's going on there now. The main problem is that there are over 20,000 people involved, 20,000 people involved directly in mining, and many more thousands involved indirectly in the area. And there are virtually no controls on the informal gold mining that's happening there. And as you'll see in the piece, one of the problems is this illegal mining is starting to encroach on the buffer zones of the national parks, which they depend on for their ecotourism. To give you some sense of how, before I show you the film, how out of control the mining is, when I went to interview the local governor, we met in a newly constructed tourist welcome center, except it was now housing the local government. And the interview you'll see in the film was conducted there because illegal miners and small-scale miners had burned down the government buildings the previous year when the government tried to impose restrictions on miners who were doing illegal mining. So with that, I will roll the story.
Next, the destructive lure of gold in the remote reaches of Peru. Our report is part of a collaboration with the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting. It comes from special correspondent Steve Sapienza in Peru.
In southeastern Peru, where the Andes Mountains meet the Amazon, lies one of the world's richest ecosystems. Roughly the size of California, the Madre de Dios region not only attracts tourists, but also those trying to cash in on this region's abundant natural resources. Rampant illegal gold mining has authorities here scrambling to protect the Amazon's last untouched tracts of rainforest. At stake are countless rare plant and animal species and the sanctity of indigenous tribes, some still living in self-imposed isolation. Rising gold prices and the near-complete Brazil-Peru interoceanic highway have combined to propel fortune hunters deeper and deeper into the Amazon. A few hundred miners first settled along the new highway in 2007. Now dozens of ramshackle mining towns line the road, catering to every need and desire of the miners. Close to 30,000 people tied to mining activity now call the region home, with more arriving daily. In the region's capital, Puerto Maldonado, recent efforts by local officials to halt illegal mining have been met with violence.
This
is a problem that grows every day, and it is a macro problem. It is a problem that if it is not stopped, and if we do not receive the necessary and immediate help, then I'm certain that this will be one of the first issues that the new government of Mr. Ollanta Humala will have to face.
Governor Jose Luis Aguirre wants Peru's president Ollanta Humala to declare a state of emergency in Madre de Dios in order to receive federal troops and funds to deal with the negative impacts of illegal gold mining.
The problem with the mining is that it brings other problems along with it. It brings human trafficking, child exploitation. It also brings many cases of sexually transmitted diseases. It brings criminality. These problems exist because these areas are no man's land.
Drive the interoceanic highway north about 1 hour from the capital, Puerto Maldonado, and you enter a red-hot zone for illegal mining called La Pampa. Forester Alfredo Rocco has lived here for 36 years and manages 6,400 acres of rainforest granted to him by the government. The owners of farm and forestry concessions like Rocco now face a daily threat of invasion by illegal miners who jump property lines or claim to have mining rights to their property.
The highway itself does not do any damage. But the fact is, the miners are illegal.
2 years ago, miners invaded Rocco's property. He now walks the trails of his concession several times a month in search of illegal miners.
At this moment, we are arriving at the spot where 2 years ago they entered my concession. 2 miners with 2 machines. That is how they started this illegal work. We can see some regeneration because this area has not been touched since. They work for about 3 days here installing the machines. That is how it starts. Then there can be 20, 30, 40 engines, and the devastation is completely harsh. Sand. It's all sand.
Rocco ran the miners off his property, but the scars remain. He now heads a coalition of farmers and foresters that lobby the government to stop illegal mining.
We notified the authorities so they could take action, because it was affecting the condition of the forest and of the area. And regrettably, here we are in 2011, and things have gone up 1,000%.
This is what landowners like Alfredo Rocco are worried about.
We're just a few miles up the road from his house, and what you can see just off the highway is a mining operation. This right behind us here is a former mining pit that's been filled in with water. All the nutrients have been taken out of the soil. The miners have long moved on, and as far as you can see into the distance, this entire area has been turned into a desert.
Victor Zambrano is an elected official who manages the buffer zones that protect the 3.7 million acre Tamboparo National Reserve.
We have laws for farmers. And we have laws for forestry concessions. We have laws for everything. We have laws for small-scale mining. However, nobody obeys those laws.
Illegal mining in La Pampa is so rampant and the miners so brazen that the equipment and open pits are easily visible from the highway. Walk a few hundred yards from the road and you can see the full extent of the damage. And yet the government seems powerless to stop the miners. This farmer claims miners invaded her property by force.
First, there were 10 or 15. Then before I knew it, there were 80. And they had guns and would not leave.
Local police gave me this video of a raid on a mining operation in La Pampa. After a short standoff with the illegal miners, the police moved in and confiscated the motors that run the mining equipment. One day after the raid, I returned to the illegal mining area to see what had changed. On the highway, miners were already arriving with replacement parts. I caught up with this miner who confirmed the raided mine was back in operation.
Things are normal. Just now I saw a few miners and they were working as normal.
From the looks of it, the entire La Pampa region was back to mining. Just across the highway from where the police raid occurred, I filmed several illegal mines in operation. With a small force that numbers 400 police and a region awash in guns, local authorities have little ability to investigate and prosecute environmental crimes.
We know that gold is not a permanent resource. However, the forest and agriculture have a future because they are renewable. They can grow again and again all the time. But the mining leaves nothing. We say, bread for today and hunger tomorrow. That is how we describe what will happen in La Pampa if they don't stop this.
Earlier this year, the police attacked and destroyed mining dredges on the Madre de Dios River. But the police action had no impact on the hundreds of small-scale mines that work the gold-rich riverbanks. Miners are pushing further and further upriver and are now on the shores of indigenous tribes like the Boca and Ambari. The tribe's chief is not keen on the mining, which he believes is corrupting tribal traditions and culture.
Some of us are very sad that our communities are filled with gold. They've changed. And the natives are now moving to the mainland. They take the money they make to Puerto Maldonado, and they have nice homes. We were not made for that. We get bored.
His son, who invited the miners onto their territory, sees few existing options to earn a living.
From the indigenous point of view, on the subject of agriculture, I think it could be an alternative. So if we would leave mining, then the only option would be in agriculture.
Each miner earns roughly $30 a day after the concession owner and pit boss take their cuts. Not enough to get rich, but far more than they earn farming in the surrounding highlands. Once the gold is gone, these miners will move on, leaving a polluted open wound in the earth.
There are more stories by Steve Sapienza about mining in Peru's rainforest on the Pulitzer Center for Crisis Reporting website. Find a link on our site.
So there are a few places I've been where I've seen so many negative impacts of an activity in one place. So there, you have the deforestation, you have soil degradation, you've got human trafficking, sexual exploitation. In fact, the week after I left, there was a raid on local brothel, and I think there was about 100 women who were basically trafficked into the region who were released. Beyond that, there's the encroachment onto the indigenous lands by this mining and how that disrupts these indigenous tribes and their cultures and their ways and their values. Just incidentally, globally, 50% of newly mined gold is sourced from native lands. I just, in looking into this, preparing for this, just came up with that fact, and it's really pretty interesting. Globally, 50% of newly mined gold is sourced from native lands. Then there's health and safety issues. I didn't get into it in this story because I saved it for a second one on the use of mercury. And it takes 2 ounces of mercury to produce an ounce of gold. Means there's about 50 tons of mercury that are used to extract the roughly 25 metric tons of gold that come out of that region every year. And everyone knows that mercury is just a toxic substance that has legacy and health implications for generations to come. The miners that I met were very blasé about using mercury. They told me, as long as you're not a pregnant woman, then you can use the mercury and there's no problem. When I was in the pits with them, they would take the mercury and pour it into these barrels, and then they would pull up their pant leg, put their leg in the barrel, and swish around the mercury, sand, and gold until all the gold stuck to the mercury, and they'd pull that amalgam out and collect it. And they showed me what was really just a small handful of this amalgam. And of course, to get the mercury separated from the gold, they have to take it to a gold shop where they burn it. And so now you have mercury vapors, which are extremely dangerous. Most of these gold shops are in the small villages around the region. So you have people living in close proximity to these shops who are inhaling. And in some cases, the shop owners and their families are inside the shop with no ventilation, burning the mercury off the gold. So it's a huge and growing health problem. It has been showing up with more frequency in the local fish population, and of course fish is a primary diet for people in the region. It's served at a lot of restaurants, and indigenous people, in fact, while I was there, they were buying fish and catching fish left and right. So it's in the food stream. Another problem, I mean, I did this in 2011, and there's really been just a cycle of violence and intimidation between the local government and these miners. And what happens is that the government will announce that they're going to try to formalize the small-scale mining sector, and that they're going to have rules, and you're going to have to apply for environmental permits. You have to go through checks. And what happens is that sparks protests, sometimes countrywide in Peru, because there are so many small-scale miners all across Peru who don't want to come under the foot of the federal government. And in Madre de Dios, where you have a lot of people coming in from Brazil, you have a lot of people working in illegal gold mining who maybe perhaps are, let's say, can't find jobs elsewhere because of criminal backgrounds. There's a lot of guns in the area. Every now and then they charge into the city of Puerto Maldonado and really cause mayhem, block the streets, like I mentioned before, burn down government buildings, and intimidate the local citizens and the government into getting their way. And so really, I mean, to give you an update, not too much has changed since 2011. It's still a high level of destruction going on to the environment. There's still large numbers, 20 to 30,000 illegal miners. Most recently, the government, I think finally, one of the reports I read was that they recently did arrest some illegal miners. They had never really prosecuted any illegal miners for these activities, but recently they did arrest some miners. They said they were going to prosecute. This caused a huge general strike, and so the situation right now, as we sit here, remains very tense down there and could boil over. So that's the first story I wanted to show you, and moving on, I will go from there to the reporting project I did with Jason Motlaw last year in Thailand, and looking at another commodity that we like to consume here in the United States, and that's shrimp, cheap shrimp, farm-raised. We have a huge appetite here for cheap shrimp, and Thailand really exports an enormous amount of shrimp to the U.S. In fact, a third of Thailand's exported shrimp goes to the U.S., and we're Thailand's top customer for shrimp. And many large retail outlets, you can find Thai shrimp at these big stores like Costco. You can find it in some of the seafood chain restaurants, and you maybe wonder why you get a huge all-you-can-eat plate of shrimp for $9.99, and you'll see some of the reasons why that happens. I think, the shrimp, when you think about it, there's been breakthroughs in aquaculture and farming that allow Thailand to really keep up with rising demand. But there's another side to it too. There's another side to their success, and a lot of that has to do with taking advantage of Burmese migrant workers who work in the Thai shrimp industry, and they help keep costs down by basically exploiting these Burmese workers in many different peeling sheds and factories that you'll see as part of this story. As I mentioned, this story you're about to see is part of a reporting project with Jason Motlaw, so we produced news, print articles, and also this story. This woman right here, she's a Burmese migrant laborer at a shrimp peeling area.
Next, the demand for cheap shrimp has sparked abuses in Thailand's growing industry. Americans consume more imported shrimp from Thailand than any other country. Our report is part of a collaboration with the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting. It comes from special correspondent Steve Sapienza in Thailand.
Thailand is the source of 1/3 of all shrimp imported by the U.S. each year, and the low price has fueled a growing appetite for it.
The Thai shrimp industry is thriving. Hundreds of factories, large and small, will ship over 200,000 tons of shrimp to the U.S. this year, generating over $1 billion in income. But there's a darker side to the business here, one that includes human trafficking, corruption, and violence against workers.
Migrants from nearby Burma are the lifeblood of the Thai shrimp industry. Most Thais won't work for the low wages paid by the shrimp companies. So today, as many as 400,000 Burmese migrants work in cis.uchicago, where 40% of Thailand's shrimp are peeled and frozen for export. Only 70,000 workers are legally registered.
There are an estimated 1,200 to 1,300 factories, 300 or 400 of which are not registered with the government.
Thai labor activist Sampong Sakal says the most severe abuses occur in the network of unregistered, almost invisible peeling sheds that supply shrimp to larger factories for export to the U.S.
The small factory owners know that most of their workers are undocumented, so they can control the workforce however they want, such as locking workers in until they finish their work. There are also teenagers between 12 and 17 years old in the workforce. We were made to work from 3 a.m. until 9 p.m. We earned about $10 for a day. Our hands were like machines.
Like most migrants, Kong Wei Tae was eager to leave Burma, where jobs are scarce and the salaries very low. The father of 5 easily found a labor broker and paid in advance for a job in Thailand.
I was smuggled in. My village had burned down. We had nothing to get by. We had some gold that we had sold, and we used that to get here.
When Kong Wei's family reached Thailand and began work, the peeling shed owner trapped them in debt.
We had to pay for everything ourselves, for meals, for housing. We didn't earn a daily wage. We earned based on how many kilograms of shrimp we peeled. If we finished, for example, 30 kilos, we only got paid for 20 kilos.
Kong Wei's 16-year-old daughter was the fastest shrimp peeler in the shed, a distinction that earned her no favor with the owner.
My hands were so painful that I could not even put on the gloves. I said I will go to the clinic and then take only 1 day off. But she, the owner, cursed me. And then she called her brother and threatened me. She said, if I do not work, she will lock me up with her brother in a room.
After 6 months, Kong Wei managed to call relatives who bought his family's freedom from the factory. He still lives in Thailand, now working to pay back his relatives in Burma.
Police are not willing to cooperate, and certain laws regarding exploitation and human trafficking are loosely enforced. The brokers may be arrested, but their employers and factory owners are able to bail them out of jail.
If you look at the cost of shrimp overseas, it's very cheap. And that comes from the exploitation which is inherent in the system in Thailand.
Andy Hall researches Burmese migrant issues at Thailand's Mahidol University.
I think the industry as a whole is not regulated properly, and I don't think there is enough traceability in where the shrimp are coming from, and that's where the exploitation comes in.
The spokesman for the Thai Frozen Food Association, Arton Pibuntana Patana, insists the shrimp industry supply chain is not tainted by labor violations.
Can you guarantee to U.S. consumers that the shrimp that is produced here in Thailand and ends up on their plates is free from child labor and also exploitive labor practices?
If the shrimp from TFF members, I can 100% guarantees.
Part of his guarantee rests on weekly inspections conducted by the TFFA at its member factories.
We are making unannounced visits to our members and also to all the suppliers at the moment. So if anyone get caught to use child labor or to abuse the workforce, they automatically get expelled from GFA.
But critics point out problems with the industry-led audits.
We do know from speaking to workers that often when there's audits in the factories, children will be sent home. Half of the workforce who don't have documents will be asked to stay home. And, you know, generally when these audits happen, people know in advance that they're going to happen, and therefore the conditions are improved. We've heard that a lot, which suggests they're being deceived.
So after 3 years of doing these inspections almost every Friday, you guys have found no violations?
No violation.
No child laborers? No problems with passports being held from workers or workers being paid below minimum wage, anything like that?
No.
So they'll look at the factories which are packaging and exporting where the conditions are reasonable. Most of these big international companies are being audited, and they are, but you know, nobody's looking where the shrimp come from.
The Thai shrimp industry does not allow independent third-party audits of its factories and peeling sheds. However, our own investigation, using a worker with a hidden camera, confirmed workplace violations in a peeling shed that supplies a top exporter of shrimp to the U.S. market.
Processed shrimp from the factory are sent to the Thai Royal Factory twice a day. I saw 4 children. They were about 15 years old. I think 20 out of the 50 workers do not have work permits.
The lack of transparency in the Thai shrimp industry has contributed to Thailand's poor human trafficking record. For the 3rd year in a row, Thailand has been placed on the U.S. State Department's watch list for not showing evidence of increasing efforts to address human trafficking compared to the previous year.
To a certain extent, the Thai government is serious about the matter, as they are heavily accused of human trafficking by the U.S. government. To solve the problem, there needs to be a cooperation between factory owners, the government sector, and NGOs involved. But there's an obstacle to the resolution due to the corruption of officials and bribery.
Critics warn that until the Thai shrimp industry opens its factories to independent audits, the shrimp it exports will likely remain tainted by human trafficking.
Steve Sapienza has reported other stories about the price of producing items many of us take for granted. Find a link on our website to the Pulitzer Center's Global Goods, Local Costs page.
So needless to say, Jason's articles and this story, when it aired, the Thai government was, and the Thai shrimp industry were not very happy with these stories. In fact, the Thai government, the Thai embassy in Washington wrote a letter to the editor at the Washington Post talking about the film and how it was inaccurate and the reporting was bad. There was at the same time a move by the Thai shrimp industry to go on a openness initiative where they invited reporters to come and look at the factories and how the conditions were actually very good. And you had local media, the Bangkok Post, actually saw this report, and they had been reporting on this issue for some time and picked it up, and were also really critical of the fact that the Thai government has done very little to investigate the claims of human trafficking and child labor in these sheds. And so there was some positive reviews we got of the reports that we did from the NGOs. We heard that it caused a huge stir over in Thailand, and many people in the government and with the shrimp industry were really upset, but that things were actually changing. There was some dialogue that was going on that hadn't existed between the NGOs and the government, and they were getting some of their concerns heard. One of the things that the government did after these stories ran was that they really jump-started their initiative to register the undocumented workers, and they had a large number of Burmese migrant workers that they were trying to register. That whole campaign to register these workers did not go very well. They did not register a lot of these workers. And so still today, there are very many workers who are outside of legal protection and who are virtually just prey to brokers and to the peeling shed operators who want to take advantage of them and put them into debt bondage. The U.S. State Department, in its most recent human rights report, once again flagged Thailand as a tier 3 human trafficking country. There is a risk that the State Department could downgrade them, and I don't believe that sanctions would ensue, but it would be put them in the realm of other countries with really bad human trafficking and human rights issues, and it's something that Thailand doesn't want. And every time that this report comes out, they send emissaries over to dissuade the State Department from putting them on this list. The U.S. Labor Department recently just added Thailand's fishing industry to its global forced labor list. So along with the shrimp, garment, and sugarcane industries in Thailand, the Labor Department recognizes that there's still child labor and forced labor used in these industries. Just to give you an update on Andy Hall, the gentleman you saw from Myhodol University, he went on to co-author a report about the National Fruit Company, and he co-authored a report that really alleged that there was child labor use in some of its fruit factories, and now he is being sued for millions of dollars in Thai courts. And in fact, he's got a warrant out for his arrest. If he goes back to Thailand, he will be arrested. He's currently in England at home, and according to the Spalding Guardian newspaper, he said on October 16th that he plans to return to Thailand for work, even though there's a warrant out for his arrest. So that's an update on what's happening with the Thai shrimp story. And that's the two stories I was planning to show, and I guess we'll sit down and take questions.
Again, thank you both for fascinating presentations. These stories are really quite amazing and really illustrate, I mean, if we're talking about local costs, these costs are ecological very clearly and very clearly economic as well, but they also expose all sorts of costs that relate to a whole host of issues, from migration issues to interethnic tensions to sexual exploitation, child labor, class issues, health issues. It's really extraordinary to see how this kind of cuts across the whole board of a bundle of social issues. What it also seems interesting is that it exposes, I don't know if you would call this a deeper cause, but you know, the cause of intense poverty and its impact on kind of, and as an engine that's really motivating all these really horrible processes, as well as the lack of political capacity, I think, on a very local level to, you know, as individuals to directly appeal to governments to, you know, force them to hold multinationals accountable, or, you know, kind of working, I guess every nation is different on what kind of local governments they have and how strong they are. But I was wondering if, as we begin this discussion, if you could maybe just, and actually at the very end of your presentation, you summarized quite nicely about how the impact of your presentation before on the area was just, actually did make a really big difference. And I'd love to, maybe if you guys could just talk about that a little bit more, about kind of local reception, maybe more about, since you talked about Thailand already, maybe in the Peru case, or Botswana as well, if you can, just how has this been received, and to what extent do you think it has been able to make some inroads, if any, and maybe it's made none, on these big issues like poverty, like political empowerment?
Well, for my part, since my project was a shorter project that didn't involve like a lengthy span or anything like that, I think just to reiterate something I said in my talk, the Botswana in general the people of Botswana in general seem to have more of like an attitude of unity towards issues of poverty and water resources. The idea is, if on a whole we can, prosper and become economically viable as a nation, then if each individual is suffering a little bit less or a little bit more, then that's worth it. But yeah, I haven't seen any direct impacts by reporting or anything like that.
Yeah, not sure my reporting had any direct impact either in Peru, but the governor in the piece, he talked about the new administration of Ollanta Humala, and when the day I arrived was his inaugural, and he's still dealing with this issue. It's a festering issue. The president was elected as a populist, and he has to walk a fine line. I mean, he doesn't want to. He works with these multinational companies and the big mining concerns. He wants to get a handle on the small-scale mining and the obviously the destruction and the devastation that's going on in that region. But there are underlying bigger issues like poverty that's really driving those people to that region to dig for gold. Many of them come from the farming communities and near Cusco and Puno and these other highland areas, and they're really searching for a way to make a living. While I was there, I did talk with a local NGO, and they had been experimenting with some planting of papaya plantations or fields, and giving a farmer one of these fields to cultivate. And what they found out was they were able to figure out a certain size, and I'm sorry I don't remember the size right now, but that farmer could generate more money from that papaya agriculture than he could doing daily mining for $30 or $50 or $100 a day. So it is possible to find alternatives. There are NGOs on the ground there that are doing things like reforestation and involving locals in that and looking for other alternatives. But I think the bigger issue, the underlying issue is the poverty, and still strong.
Should I use the mic? Okay.
I just wanted to add, when we're thinking about impact, I know something important for us at the Pulitzer Center and something we're always looking at is what's the impact then for the audience too, and the consumers. And when we're looking at this issue specifically, we are, as consumers, also very much part of this chain. And I know for us, I guess what I'm trying to say is I think this is why this reporting is so important, because it does highlight, what we all have to do with this, and sort of forces us to think about when we're buying a bag of shrimp, looking at where it came from, and we're thinking about what diamonds we buy. The consumer piece of this is really important. And I wonder, with De Beers, did you get any sort of responses? Have you seen, how have people, so not just the companies involved, but how have your friends, how are other people responding to the issues that you're raising, and did it change your way of thinking about these kinds of commodities? And same for you, Steve.
De Beers actually never responded to my many multiple inquiries for just a statement from them or anything like that. But as far as impact beyond like a direct level, yeah, I think because I was studying in Botswana around the time, a lot of my local friends had no idea like the hydraulic cost of mining, for example, because a lot of them do come from urban areas, and so there's definitely a very big class distinction between someone who's living in the capital city of Gaborone versus a village like Maboane. You have no idea what's going on. For people, for like a lot of my classmates at the University of Botswana, that was something that they didn't really express. And I think I forgot to mention one of the policy analysts that I interviewed in my piece. We spoke a couple of times, and I think he presented a case to get rid of that government subsidy for government mines, and that's going to be up for a vote sometime this year. So hopefully something will come out of that.
With regard to the illegal gold, I think the figure is somewhere around 70% of gold goes into jewelry. The rest goes into dental and investment, coins and things like that. So there is a direct consumer link. And what I found, and I actually put us in the second story that I did that was largely focused on the mercury, was that there are several groups in Latin America who are trying, or have been for a number of years, working on fair trade, fair mined gold. And so there is a movement out there to get jewelers and customers to realize that there's alternatives to buying gold that may be tainted if you want to go that route. And I visited in southern Peru a mining concern, and they were doing that. They were in the middle of trying to get certified as fair mined. It doesn't mean that they don't use any dangerous chemicals. It means that they use dangerous chemicals because mining, especially gold mining, you're required to use either cyanide or some mercury. They're using cyanide, but they're recycling it, and they have them in pits that, have redundant safety features built into them. Now, the last I heard was that the mine that I visited in southern Peru has been certified. So, there is progress being made. Right now it's small, but it is changing, and consumers, are, I think, becoming aware of alternatives.
It's a long walk.
So as a follow-up question to that, as you're showing these films to the sort of very affluent first world consumers who are ultimately responsible for buying these products, do you see this awareness, raising awareness of these issues actually translating into behavior change? And if not, what kind of obstacles do you think, what else would be necessary in order to make that jump from I know about the problem to I understand that I am part of the problem to now let me take action to help fix the problem?
Yeah, I mean, that's difficult. I'm a journalist. I'm supposed to just report this story and hope that it causes some reaction and that things change. And I think in this day and age, with social media and the way people can organize, there are a ton of opportunities for consumers who are aware of an issue to galvanize and take action. I mean, with the gold story, it's a little difficult. Even in Peru, they don't know where a lot of that illegal gold goes because it gets mixed in with a lot of the certified gold, I guess, that's legally mined. So it's very difficult to tell. But with things like shrimp, you can go to your store and see where your shrimp is coming from. You can ask questions from the stores that are selling their shrimp to find out where it's being farmed and how it's being farmed. I think most consumers, or a lot of consumers these days, are aware of these types of programs out there like fair trade and do look for those types of things. And I think raising the profile of an issue like illegal gold or these human trafficking in the shrimp industry does create awareness and hopefully some change.
As much overlap as you have between the three presentations, there's distinctions too, and the distinctions are certainly that in Thailand they seem to be attempting, maybe hypocritically, attempting to respond to the presentations that you make about what's happening there, and they have an organization that goes and inspects. In Botswana, you have a corporation that's sharing 50%. I think that's what you said. Mm-hmm. Beers has 50% agreement with Botswana, and so you have a corporate devastation of Botswana. But the devastation, it seems to be less, according to what you were saying, than the subsistence farming. As far as subsistence farming seems to contribute less to the GDP, however, uses as much of the water. My question is the distinctions in the case of what's happening in Peru. If there were a corporate group that was doing as much devastation, but was sharing that with the Peruvian government as a 50-50 contract, we'd still have some problems. We would still have problems that there was some devastation of the land and how much it was being distributed, amongst the villagers, and whether there would be villages that would be saying, well, we don't want the people to go to the city, we want to keep the village going, or something like that. But that's there's a distinction between the three cases that is sort of interesting about the level of whatever modernity that is situated in each of these situations.
Yeah.
So could you maybe elaborate on those, or how you feel about those, looking at, not necessarily as a journalist, looking at each case as a global problem, but looking at, well, are some cases better than others, or worse than others, or what can we do about others, and we can put more emphasis on reporting in Thailand because they seem to be responsive to reporting. We can do something else in Botswana, maybe talk about going in with NGOs into the villages and saying, maybe you shouldn't be doing subsistence farming, maybe you should figure another way of life or something like that, and we could, have less use of water and still work out some way of sustaining this environment. That's my question.
Mm-hmm. I think in the case of Botswana, just speaking to people who are knowledgeable about Botswana's history and culture, that cattle ranching and subsistence farming is such an integral part to Botswana's history and culture, and the majority of Botswana who do subsistence farming and rely on it don't have any other means of providing for themselves. We have a lot of Bushmen or San people in the northern regions of Botswana where subsistence farming is no longer available to them, so they have reverted back to hunting and gathering. And so, yes, in one sense, subsistence farming is contributing more to this depletion of water than perhaps De Beers, but the other argument is that De Beers can definitely afford it more. And I think some of the things that I was talking to the policy analysts about was about making sure that De Beers is accountable for at least paying for the cost of that water, and maybe that could be leveraged in such a way to channel it back to these, rural and impoverished villages. So I think you're right, there's definitely a level of distinction between the role of the government and the role of corporations and the role of individuals in the amount of water you consume, and everyone should be responsible, but that's the thing, everyone should be responsible, whether it is a subsistence farmer or a large corporation like De Beers.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I thought about the large-scale mining versus this illegal mining while I was there. I mean, in some sense, and you can pick up a newspaper just about any day and look at what large-scale mines are doing to local communities up and down throughout Latin America. And, it's not always positive, the results. But at the same time, the footprint of some of these big large-scale mines is so large, they do have to deal directly with the government. In some ways, I think, an established, formalized big mine, is preferable to all this just unregulated, out of control, small-scale mining. That said, there's still problems with large-scale mines as well. But the mine that I visited in southern Peru that was being, certified as fair trade, fair mine, I mean, that gives some hope that on the smaller scale mines it can be done. But again, in Peru, it's the underlying issue of poverty that's got to be addressed to make a dent. In Thailand, it's a lot of big corporations that sell shrimp to the U.S. They're using migrant labor from Burma primarily to get there, to achieve, their fabulous sales and export numbers. And, on the books in Thailand, there are laws about paying workers in these factories a certain amount of money, not employing child labor, not letting brokers get involved in the process and put people into debt bondage. There are laws on the books to stop this. It's just not being enforced by the government. And so there's a real negligence on the side of the government. And a lot of these corporations are, I think, overlooking the fact that their supply chains aren't clean. So the problem there is with, the government and these corporations, these big exporters, really kind of passing the buck or dropping the ball.
American corporations are consuming a large volume of shrimp in their business, in their industry, and in the areas that they see that there's monetary benefits to it. The question is, if they practice the same principles that they practice here in America in dealing with international trade, it should elevate the level of decency in handling employment and then also in the purchasing of the product. Hypothetically, I must use that word, Red Lobster has Shrimp Fridays. You could eat all the shrimp in the world. They do not catch that shrimp in America. Where are they getting it from? The problem is the solution lies in the hands of the consumers, not in the hands of the government. And if the consumers should rise up and state their position, I think we would have some rectification of the problem. Now, in regards to the water situation in Botswana, sometimes the solution is not in the dollars and cents, but in the structure in which the way in which you address the problem. In Botswana, they use water for bathing, for washing clothes, and these items. That water may be just going down into the drain. Set up a system to recycle that water and send it to the fields, to the cornfields, to the plantations. And also, I don't know how mining is done with water, but if the water that is being used in the mines doesn't necessarily have to meet the level of cleanliness as the water that is needed to feed and to grow crops, then use the runoff from the community and send it back to the mines so that they can, because you don't drink the mine water. So what you're doing is changing the cycle, and therefore the water could be used and reused. And I think that might help. I don't have the method.
Yeah, that's a fair point. There's a lot of technologies being developed in Southern Africa right now about water reusage, having like cleaning water and bathing water basically streamed back into the agriculture fields. As for mining water, water in mining is used primarily first to dewater a mine, which means they go in and sort of like flood a mine area and then drain it. So that's completely unusable because there's a lot of agricultural runoff and also mineral runoff that's just like not usable for agricultural or human purposes. And in everyday needs, same thing, cooling and just sort of fine-toning the quality of the diamonds also just creates a really large amount of industrial runoff that's not usable for water. So, but yeah, there's definitely a lot of technologies out there that's used in Botswana to have multiple purposes of multiple purpose water usage. So yeah, definitely something that's happening.
Do you? Unless you want to add anything to it.
Good.
Why don't we continue this conversation upstairs in the social sciences tea room? I don't remember, it's a left and up the stairs? Okay, because I mean, I'm sure we all have more questions, but maybe we could do it over some snacks. And I'm sorry, we're short on time today, but you guys, we can exploit our speakers upstairs. We'll take them away from their drinks. Let's thank them again for coming here.
The World Beyond the Headlines lecture series is a project of the University of Chicago Center for International Studies. Our nationally recognized programming is made possible with support from the Norman Waite Harris Memorial Fund. Download recordings of other events and learn more about the World Beyond the Headlines series at the Center for International Studies website, cis.uchicago.edu.